21. He cuts the hadasim, and after he cuts the hadasim, you will go ahead and you'll buy it from him. That's how. Um, now, what's the issue? The issue is there was um, certain lands. It was a minority, so it wasn't the majority of lands. It was a minority of lands, as some explained, that was stolen. That the non-Jewish people had stolen, and you need to ensure that what you're using on the holiday, just to ensure that it's not stolen, because you have to make sure that, because if it's stolen, it's not called yours. First of all, on the first day of the holiday, it's not called yours, and there might be issues the other days of the holiday as well. And it's a mitzvah that's being done as a result of a sin. So how do you ensure that this is owned by you? So the Gemara said the way you ensure that you own it is by you telling the non-Jew to cut the hadassim. Now, the field that the non-Jew was living in, the original owner, who the concern was this might have been Jewish, he gave up hope from getting this field back. This is something that's been going on for many years. That the person who's possessing the field has been taking over the field. It doesn't seem like you're hoping to get it back, this field. So there was yush, means you gave up hope from getting it back. And the fact if the guy cuts the hadassim and he sells it to you, and you buy it from him, and then you're going to sell it to the Jewish people who are going to buy it from you. So there was already a giving up, which is called yush. Also, transfer of location, transfer of shina reshut, it changed domains, and therefore the person who buys it would be fine. He would be able to use it. And the Gemara explained that really, if the wholesaler is buying it from me, the customer, technically, then the Gemara says technically even the wholesaler, the Jewish guy, would be able to even cut it himself, because like we said, most likely it's not stolen. He could cut it, but in the possibility that it's stolen, so if he cuts, even if the Jew cuts it, even if the Jew stole it, but now it was transferred to someone else's domain, to my domain, the buyer, and the original person gave up hope. So by the time it comes to the customer, it definitely would belong. The customer could keep it; it's considered his, and the one who stole it will have an obligation to pay back money to the original owner. Well, what the Gemara said, but what the situation is, if the wholesaler is Jewish, right? You know, the merchants that buy wholesalers also have to fulfill the mitzvah of lulav and etrog. And now we have to make sure that the wholesaler is not using something that doesn't belong to him. How do we ensure that the wholesaler is using something that belongs to him? So the Gemara says that so the Gemara asked the following question. We are now on 30b2. 30b2 or 30b1, one second. 30b1 at the end of the page. V'liknuhu b'shini ma'isa. The Gemara's question is, let's make it clear, Ralph, right? The Gemara's question is, the wholesaler, the Jewish wholesaler, what are we concerned? We want to know if the hadassim that he's buying, right, is going to this field that's occupied by a non-Jew. There's a small possibility it's stolen goods. So now we want to make sure, how does he ensure that he's using item that's technically not stolen, technically belongs to him? So how do you ensure? Maybe if you go to this field and you're buying hadassim, maybe you're buying stolen goods. So how do you ensure that you're going to have a right? So the Gemara said that if he would be selling it to me, so even if it's stolen, there's a law that something that's stolen and the owner gives up hope, and it's transferred to another domain besides the thief, then the person who buys it keeps it. And the one who stole it has the obligation to pay back money for it. How would you know whether, right? We don't know. But our concern is how can we ensure that the buyer is going to the one who is using that I'm doing the mitzvah, the customer. How do we? Is there any concern that I might be using something that's not mine when I buy from this when I buy from this field? So if I'm buying directly from the field, not from the middleman, if I'm buying directly from the field, if the owner of the field who was a possible thief, if he cut the hadassim, now it's considered stolen because it was cut. It's off because once it's attached to the field, you can't. Field doesn't get stolen. It still remains in the same place. It's not called stolen. But once it was cut, it's stolen. But now, even if it's stolen, but there are opinions to say that when does it belong to the person? That there's only a financial obligation, and the item itself belongs to somebody. It belongs. So once the thief, meaning the question is that let's say the guy, if somebody goes, if I would be the wholesaler, if I would go into the field of the guy who's possessing the field, and I would cut the hadassim, I might have done the stealing. And if I did the stealing because I cut the hadassim, then there was no transfer out of my domain. So this hadassim still belongs to the original owner. If I walk into the field and it's possible this field was stolen and I cut the hadassim, who does these hadassim belong to? The original owner. But if I stole these hadassim, I cut the hadassim, and then after I cut the hadassim, I sold it to you, Ralph. Now that I sold it to you and the original owner gave up hope of ever getting those hadassim back, those hadassim belong to Ralph. But I, who stole it, have to pay money. And if the hadassim belonged to Ralph, so Ralph could use those hadassim for the midst of lulav. You need hadassim for your lulav. You could use those hadassim for the lulav. He's not going to tell you, but we know these lands, these are lands that Jews own that used to inhabit this area, and they know there's a possibility that maybe it was stolen. Maybe the non-Jew took this land by force. So to ensure that Ralph is using kosher hadassim, that Ralph owns these hadassim. So if I bought these hadassim, if I went into the land, if I cut the hadassim and I sell it to Ralph definitely owns these hadassim. And I might have stolen it. I might have an obligation to go ahead and pay. If I stole it, I have to pay the owner back. But the Gemara says, why do we need? We said that if I am the wholesaler, if I'm buying the hadassim for myself, we said, I'm buying it directly from the non-Jew who possesses the land. The Gemara says, I have to make sure that the non-Jew who possesses the land should cut the hadassim himself. And then I should buy it from him. So the Gemara, and what will that do? Because then if the non-Jew stole it, so then he, by cutting it, he created the act of stealing. And then I buy it from him, it left his domain, so it left the domain of the thief, plus the original owner gave up hope. So now I, the wholesaler, could use it for myself. So the Gemara says, why does the wholesaler have to go ahead and actually cut the hadassim himself, even when he wants to use it? Good morning, Simon. Even if he wants to use it for himself, but there's another way that the wholesaler could acquire the hadassim. That the hadassim could belong to him. That's the Gemara's question. We're now on 30. Right. The Gemara's question is: we said that the wholesaler, if he wants to use that hadassim for himself, he should get the non-Jew to cut it. So therefore, the non-Jew, if it's stolen, the non-Jew did the act of thievery by cutting it. Because until it was cut, it really there's no act. It's the land. You can't steal land, and therefore now if the non-Jew cut it, and then it goes, and I, the wholesaler, buy it from him. So now there's a change of domain, and it was stolen, and the owner gave up hope. So now I can fulfill my mitzvah of the hadassim. I, the wholesaler. What say? No, but now it's the hadassim. It's no more land. It's a movable item now. So the Gemara says, why do I got to go through that way? Why can't the Jew, the wholesaler, go and cut the hadassim himself, and he will acquire the hadassim? Why? Because there's a shin ma'aseh. When you take, what do you do with the hadassim? You're going to go ahead. What is the Jew going to do? He's going to take the hadassim and he's going to tie it to the bundle. He's going to tie the hadassim to the lulav. So now there's a change in the hadassim. The hadassim are no longer going to be just hadassim, and the fact that they're changed. So the fact that they are changed should be enough to make the wholesaler acquire. So why does the non-Jew who owns who is possessing the property have to cut the hadassim? Even when the wholesaler wants to use it for himself, let him, the Jewish wholesaler, go in and cut it. If you can say, Rabbi, what do you mean? If the Jewish wholesaler cuts it, the actual cutting is an act of stealing, because now the property becomes stolen, because until now you couldn't steal land. Now that you cut it, but we're saying most likely it's not really stolen. That's how some of the commentaries explain. It's a very far-fetched, it's a small chance that it's stolen. So therefore, we're not really concerned if you, the Jew, will actually cut it. You're doing an act of stealing. But the fact that there is this possibility that it's stolen, we're gonna be concerned regarding you fulfilling the mitzvah of the lulav and the etrog and the das and the ravas. Maybe you are using something that's not yours. Maybe later on someone's going to claim that the field was not. Someone's going to claim that the field wasn't belonged to them, the Jewish person, and therefore it comes out you didn't do the mitzvah. So the Gemara says, "V'liknu b'shinei ma'aseh." If the fact that the Jew who would let him cut the hadassim, and then he'll go ahead and he'll tie it to the lulav, and by tying it to the lulav, there's a change. So there's a rule: if you make a change, if somebody steals something, at what point does he no longer have the responsibility to pay back the item that he stole? At what point does he have financial? When does the financial obligation? The Torah says, "V'heshivas agzela gemoni maris, v'heshivas agzela asher gozal." The Torah says you return, Morris, if you want to send to the group that we're on, that would be great. The Torah says you return this item that you stole. But if you stole an item and you change the item, and you change it, a certain type of changes, it's not the item anymore that you stole. Now, what kicks in is a financial obligation you have to pay. You have to pay. You stole. You got to pay. No, you have to pay. No question about it. You got to pay. But the question is, at what point do you still have to give back the item that you stole? Or if you went ahead, let's say you stole a piece of wood, and then you made you painted on the piece of wood, and you carved out the most beautiful carving of the wood, and you made a piece of art. It took you about 6 months, and you changed that piece of wood. You took those pieces of wood that you made, that you stole, and you turned it into a whole. Okay, but you stole but you pay the value of the thing that you stole. What did you steal? You stole the wood. Now you carved out the wood, you painted the wood, you polished the wood, you did this to the wood. It's a different wood, right? Simon, it's a different wood.
Right, because you stole something that cost a penny.
Penny now it's worth $100,000. You're not going to say you give back that 100. It's a different thing. You give back what you stole. It's not what you stole, right? What's your responsibility to give back? All your work that you put into the item. Okay, you did a terrible thing. You should not have stolen it. But listen, if you catch you give to pay double. But if you catch a thief, you pay double. The Torah said if you steal what? If you stole $100, you pay $200. It's a real fine. It's double. You stole $1,000, you pay $2,000. It's a real thing. So
you should give a percentage back when you sold it for. I sold it for 100,000. You do 10%.
Okay, so it seems okay. You did a wrong thing, and you're gonna have to pay for it. Sometimes you're gonna pay double if you're caught. and we're looking, we're looking for the person to pay back what he stole. If you stole an animal, it's like the Torah says if you steal an ox or a donkey, sometimes you might have to pay, and you're caught and you sold it, you did business with it, you have to, or you slaughtered it, you have to pay sometimes 4 or 5 times the amount, Ralph. That's where you like to hear it, right, Ralph? Let's let the Torah lace it into the guy. Because and one of the reasons is you stole my ox, and my ox is such an important thing, and you were caught, and not only you stole, you did business with it. If you steal something, you pay it back. You start stealing and you start doing business with it, you're selling it, or you slaughtered it to eat it, then we'll get there's different levels of fines.
Like you're making stealing okay.
And again, Ralph, if we charge the guy double, does it make it okay? I don't think it's okay. If he's caught, if they're caught, if they turn themselves in, they just pay what they pay back. If they turn themselves in, that's what they got to give back. They give back the item still. They stole the watch, they get back the watch. If they get caught, what do? They get double. And certain items, if we find we have to see something get paid 4 or 5 times the amount. Okay, but we don't hold of cutting. Yeah, but we don't hold of cutting the hand off. We hold other things. We hold other types of punishments. We want the guy to give back what he stole. So they're not doing anything. They're not stopping anybody. They're not stopping anybody. Are they giving anything back?
No.
They're not giving nothing back. They're selling it. They're making money on it. We have number one, the Torah is a violation. Steal, you're violating one of the 613 mitzvot. That's number one. Number two is you steal, you have a responsibility to give it back.
Stealing too. I work at an office and looking on a computer.
That's another type of stealing. It's also called stealing, right? If a person stole and they used the item, let's say they stole $10,000 and they used it all up, and we say you have to pay back. You stole that watch, $100,000 watch, pay it back. I don't have the money. We would sell him as a slave. You owe the guy $100,000. Yeah, that's how that was one of the ways the Jewish slave was sold, because he stole. You got to pay back. What do you mean? You got to pay back. Crime doesn't pay. Isn't that better than cutting the hand off? Let him use his hands to work. Right, he can be productive. He'll become a slave, and then they'll train him, they'll teach him, they'll mentor him, and they'll guide him to be a proper person, get back into society. So that's what the Gemara says. So the Gemara says, that's the Gemara. We're now on 30b2. Now we're turning the page, 30b2. That's the Gemara says. Why doesn't he acquire the item with a change? He does a change in the item because he's going to take the hadassim. We're talking about possible stolen goods, right? And you want to make sure you're using something that belongs to you. So since you're the buyer, the Jewish buyer is going to do something with that dasim. What are you going to do? You're going to tie that dasim to your lulav. What do you guys do with your dasim? You tie it to the lulav, right? So now it's no longer, there's a change. It's not just the hadassim by itself. It becomes part of a bigger picture. So the Gemara says that change should make it that now there's a financial obligation. You acquire the hadassim, belongs to you, and if it was stolen, you have only a financial obligation, and therefore you are fulfilling your mitzvah with the hadassim because it belongs to you. It's no longer belonging to the original owner because the action changes it. So the Gemara says, "Kasava lulav ein sarich eget." This opinion holds lulav, to fulfill the mitzvah of lulav, you do not need to tie the hadassim to the lulav. We tie the hadassim and the aravot to the lulav to beautify it. You bring them all together. They're tied together. It's a beautification. But you technically, let's say if you would hold the hadassim and the aravot, they're not tied together. You take them all, you fulfill your obligation of lulav and etrog. The same way you take an etrog in one hand. If I take the lulav and I take a hadassim and the aravot, they're not tied together. I'm holding them. I would get credit for the mitzvah. I didn't do it in the most beautiful way. It's most beautiful. You tie them together. Lulav. So since I don't need to tie it together, it's not considered a real change when I took the hadassim and I tied it to the lulav. It's really pretty much, it's not, since it's not something that's needed, it's not considered a significant, I significantly did something here by tying it together, and therefore it retains its status of, and it's not called a real change. Something that when you need to do this, and now you needed to create this unity of the three species, so then you really changed it. You made it into something unique. I didn't need to do this. The Gemara says, Im Tim Soloma, and if you're going to say Lulav Sarach Eged, morning, and if you're going to say Lulav, you do need to tie the Hadass and the Rovas to the Lulav. Nevertheless, this type of act of taking Hadassim and tying it to Lulav and Etrog is not called a real change, because you could just untie it. A change is something that's more that's permanent. You can't go back to where it was. Shino achuz libriotavu. It's a shini that goes back to the way it was originally, and the shini achuz librioto, and the shini that goes back to its original state is lo shmei shino. It's not called a real change. So the Gemara says, now the Gemara continues. V'liknuhu b'shinei Hashem. Why don't you acquire it with the change of a name? Because there's something
Morning,
called
Rabbi.
Mona Yosef. Welcome back. Shechianu v'kimanu v'gena lazman hazeh.
Amen, amen.
I mean, we're doing Thanksgiving today. Today is Thanksgiving for us.
Yeah.
Okay, we are on Lamed Amud Beis 30b in the Gemara and Sukkah. So the Gemara says, "V'liknu b'shinei Hashem." Why don't we say that if it's possible? What's the issue here? What the issue is the hadassim. We want to make sure when you buy these hadassim that they belong to you. They don't, because if the possibility that they're stolen goods, the small possibility of stolen goods, we want to make sure that they belong to you. So how do we make sure? The Gemara's question is, how do we make sure that it belongs to you? That it's no longer in the domain, no longer belong. The hadassim themselves don't belong to the original owner anymore. So the Gemara says, how do we ensure that? So the Gemara says we ensure that if the wholesaler wants to buy it for himself, to use for himself, he's a Jewish wholesaler, and he also needs hadassim aravas for himself. So what does he do? He has the guy who's possessing the field, the guy cuts it, we said, and if it's stolen, then the guy, by cutting it, he did the act of the thievery was done. And now that the Jew buys from him, there's a change of domain, and the original owner gave up hope. So now the merchandise belongs to the person who actually, the Jew who now bought it, this Jewish wholesaler, and there's a financial obligation on behalf of the one who stole it, if it was stolen, to pay back to the non-Jew, to pay back to the original Jew. Right, but we're saying most likely it's not stolen. It's not, meaning it's not that really. If really it was stolen, then I like you said, maybe I wouldn't be able to buy it. Then we get into issues buying stolen goods. I mean, if the owner of the land will ever come back, the original will ever come and claim it, then that non-Jew will have the responsibility, right? If he would ever show and prove, if we ever prove it, there's no free flow. The situation we're talking about, Ralph, is we don't know the history of this field. We see this non-Jew, he's living in the field. We know Jews lived in this neighborhood. We know Jews owned a lot of property in this neighborhood. Now there's non-Jews here. And we know that sometimes the non-Jews took property from the Jewish people unlawfully. Right. So the commentary is also right. Again, but this field now is possessed by a non-Jew. We don't know if this field once belonged to a Jew, was stolen from a Jew. We don't know the history of this field. And now I want to buy hadassim from this field. I need hadassim. How do I make sure that I covered myself, that I'm not using hadassim that are stolen? Now, most likely the field belongs to the non-Jew, so therefore it's not stolen. But on the possibility that it's stolen, I could cover myself by having him cut the hadassim and then selling. At that point, me buying it. But really, if I really believe it's a stolen field, I shouldn't even buy it from him because maybe, like you said, it's stolen. But most of the time, it wasn't stolen. So therefore, I have a right to buy the goods. But on the small percentage that it is stolen, I need to cover myself. So I'm covering myself by going ahead and having him cut it. So the Gemara says, why do I got to cover myself that way? Even if I would cut it, there is something called Shine Hashem. If the item that you buy there's a change in the name. If it was known as, it was one thing, it was called one thing before, and now there's a change. At a later date, it's called something else. That change would be enough that the thief or that it leaves the domain of the original owner and the one who originally belonged to, and now there's a financial obligation to pay back to the original person. But the item itself, if the one who takes an item creates a change, morning, Mr. Haber, if he does something in the item that changes the name of the item, morning, it's a different thing. You know, it's interesting. There's one of the things that we do when someone, chas v'shalom, is very sick, they change the name, right? It's like from the last resort, not last resort, but it's one of the things that people do, and it changes the mazal. It's a different person. So if there was a decree against a certain person that something should happen to him, now that he has a different name, it's a different person, and that it should help that the decree shouldn't be. So the idea is, if when the hadassim are different, they're changed, they're no longer where they were before. It's not called hadassim anymore. So that could create the change of the name should create a financial obligation to give back, and the item could be acquired through the change of the name. Oh no, it's the normal. You did something to it. You did some sort of act that creates. You did something act, or on its own. The Gemara is holding that. You see, some hold that change of a name has to also have something that it cannot go back to its original form, right? Like the Gemara said, if you have a change that goes back to its original form, that's not called a real change, right? If you go ahead, the Gemara says, and you tie the hadassim to the lulav, and then you could untie it, that's not called a real change. So if you have a change of a name, and after the change of the name, it could go back to its original name, right? So we're saying that also, so many say that's also not called a proper change. But the Gemara is what do you say? Okay. So sometimes you do something that creates the change of the name, right? You did a procedure that changed the name, and sometimes so here the Gemara is saying, look at what the Gemara is saying over here. The Gemara is suggesting the mere change of the name, liknu b'shin Hashem, the meikara. When you tied your act here, you did you tied it with the lulav. You tied the hadassim, right? What do? You take the hadassim. Good morning, welcome. You take that hadassim, you take that ravot, you tie it to the lulav. So the Gemara says, liknu b'shin Hashem, because the meikara havnei asa. In the beginning, it was called hadassim. When these hadassim, let's say if the Jewish person would cut the hadassim from the field of the non-Jew, what did he have? What were they known as before? They were known as hadassim. And now that he ties it to the lulav, it has a new name. Once it's tied to the lulav, hashta, now we're on 31a, Hoshana. Now they call this Hoshana. They call the aravot and they call the hadassim that they tie to the lulav Hoshana. Why do they call it Hoshana? Because, as you know, because since you use these items when you say Hoshana, right? When you say Hoshana, so they and you waive these items. See, some say because it's used during the Hoshana. When we say Hoshana, so they call the everything as called Hoshana. Not only they call the Hadassim Hoshana, they call the Aravot Hoshana. So because they're used during the Hoshana prayer, so now once you tied it, it has a different name. So why doesn't he acquire it through the different name that now attained as a result of being tied to the lulav? So if you acquired it during, now there's a different name. So shouldn't that create that now you have a financial obligation to pay back? You have a financial obligation to pay back the value of the Hadassim, and it belongs to the person who created the name, that did a procedure, that did something that created the change of the name. And the Gemara is holding, even though you could bring it back to its original status by undoing it, by just untying it, but this Gemara is holding that the change of the name is enough, even though you could bring it back to its original status by untying it. Since there was a change of the name, now there should be a financial obligation of the one who actually did this action, and therefore he acquires it through the change of the name. Meaning to say, let's say someone stole something from somebody. So if you left it as is, you got to give back what you stole. But if you did something to the item and it's no longer called the same item anymore, you stole wood, now you made it into a table, right? So therefore, you don't have to give back the table, you got to give back the item. The same way you took wood and you made it into, or so let's say, I would say if you took, let's say you took wood and now it's no more, and you shellacked it, you polished it, you finished the wood, right? Maybe it's no longer called wood. Maybe it's called some sort of, it's called finished wood or something. I'm not sure if that might be an example, perhaps, of something it's no longer has a different name, right? So you did something to the item, you know what I'm saying, Mr. Haver? It's no longer, so that thief who took the wood and now he went ahead and he decorated the wood. And he made some sort of he painted the wood. It's not called wood. It's called a painted, it has what? A piece of art. So now that's called a piece of art. You don't have to pay back the piece of art. You have to pay back the piece of wood. And the value of the wood. The wood belongs now to that thief. Now he acquires the wood, but he has to what? Pay for it. Okay, so the punishment is he has to. So that's the interesting thing. The Torah says if a person steals, the punishment is, it's a very interesting punishment. What's the punishment? Pay back what you stole. And if you're caught, pay double. So we have an incentive, Ms. Ralph, to prevent people from stealing. Number one, if they're caught, they're going to have to pay double. Is that an incentive? 100% payment? What is that? I think it's an incentive. And if you stole a certain item, we said an ox or a donkey, and you 4 or 5 times the amount if you stole it and sold it, stole it and slaughtered it. So the 4 or 5 times the amount. The Torah is not easy about, the Torah is not light on stealing, but the Torah is wants people to pay back what they stole. The Torah is very interested that the victim should get back what he had. The Torah is very focused that if you had a property or you had merchandise and a guy stole your merchandise, throwing him into jail is not giving you back your merchandise. He took $1 million of cameras in the riots. $1 million of cameras. He got to get back $1 million. No. Don't go. Send him to jail. It's not going to pay you back the $1 million. Yes.
So stole. Gave me what was worth. I didn't make any money.
That's true. He had no gain at the end. You received back what you got. And Because you lost all that time during that time that he stole it, right?
He got, the money got paid.
Okay, right, okay, so sometimes he's not, I mean, technically, what'd you say? Only if he was caught. If he was caught, you got back double, Ralph. If he's not caught, if he says he decides to turn himself in, you get back what you lost. Let's just finish this piece of the Gemara. So the Gemara says, so the Gemara answers the question. Meikara nami la'asa hoshana karale. See, the Gemara thought that there was a change of the name. That when you beforehand it's called Hadassim, and when you tie it to the lulav, now it's called Hoshan. Now it's a change of name, and that change of name should create a financial obligation, and therefore technically you own it at that point, even if it was stolen. So the Gemara says no, because the name, it's not only called Hoshana after you tie it to the lulav. The name Hoshana is given to the Hadassim even before you tie it to the lulav. Because being that you're going to tie it to the lulav, good morning, doctor. So you're going to go tie it to the lulav. People call it Hoshana right now, right when you got the Hadassim in your hand, before you even tied it to the lulav. The Gemara says, "Me'kara nami la'asa Hoshana karale." They call it Hoshana, and since they call it Hoshana, so there was never a change of the name. There was never a change of the name, so therefore the person, if it's stolen goods, and there was never changed, if you stole it, if you cut their dasim, and this field was possessed by a non-Jew, and the original owner was Jewish, if you, the Jew, would cut the hadasim, you would have done the act of stealing, and if you would have done the act of stealing, tying it to the lulav will not create a financial obligation. The actual hadassim still are not considered acquired by the thief. He still has the responsibility of giving that item itself back, and therefore it's not called his. Therefore, to ensure that the hadassim belongs to the person, to the Jew, when he does the mitzvah, let the non-Jew who possesses the field, let him cut the hadassim. And if it's stolen property, when he cuts it, and then this change of domain to the Jew, and the giving up hope of the original owner, well, now the Jew owns that hadassim. I want to wish everyone, it's a complicated Gemara. Thank you all for joining. We welcome you back. You were there, you came once before, right? You live in the neighborhood?
No.
Okay, anytime. We're 6:45 to 7:25 every Monday through Friday, Bezat Hashem. Okay, so maybe maybe we'll tell Morris. You want to mention to Morris, maybe he'll be able to notify them?
Put it on because some of them we went to the show.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much.
7:30 is upstairs.